It was a cold, windy night, and Sarah had just finished a late shift at work. She lived in a small rural town, surrounded by thick woods and endless winding roads. Her usual route home was through an isolated stretch of road known for being desolate, especially at night. There were no streetlights and phone signals were spotty, but she'd taken it countless times before. This time felt different. As she turned onto the narrow, dark road, her headlights cut through the thick mist that hung in the air. The trees loomed tall and eerie on either side, their branches swaying ominously. The road stretched ahead like a black ribbon disappearing into nothing. Sarah turned up the radio to drown out the unsettling silence, but all she got was static. She felt a shiver run down her spine. Her eyes flicked to the rearview mirror out of habit. That's when she noticed it. Far behind her, barely visible through the mist, were headlights. She thought nothing of it at first, just another car on the road. But the lights didn't seem to get any closer. No matter how far she drove, they kept the same distance, following her silently. Feeling uneasy, Sarah sped up, hoping to lose them. But as she accelerated, so did the car behind her. The once distant lights were now inching closer. Her heart pounded. She grabbed her phone, but of course there was no signal. Suddenly the radio crackled to life, a distorted voice coming through the static. It was unintelligible at first, then Sarah could make out a few words: "Turn back, don't." Before she could react, the lights behind her vanished, gone, as if they had never been there. Confused and terrified, she slowed down, her eyes scanning the road behind her in the rearview mirror. It was completely dark. Breathing a sigh of relief, she told herself she had imagined it. She continued driving, her knuckles white as she gripped the steering wheel. But just as she rounded a bend in the road, her headlights illuminated something ahead. A figure was standing in the middle of the road. She slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop just inches away from the figure. It was a man, drenched in the rain, wearing a long coat that seemed too big for him. His head was down, his face obscured by the shadows. She honked the horn, but the man didn't move. Her instincts screamed at her to drive around him and leave, but something about the figure held her in place. Suddenly the man's head jerked up, revealing his face, or what was left of it. His skin was pale and rotting, his eyes sunken and hollow. A twisted, malicious grin spread across his face as he took a step forward. Sarah's body froze in terror. The man moved slowly toward her car, his eyes locked on hers. She slammed her foot on the gas and swerved around him, her tires screeching as she sped down the road. She glanced in the mirror, but the man was gone. Breathing heavily, she forced herself to calm down. It wasn't until she was nearly home that she dared look in the rearview mirror again. And there, in the back seat, sat the man, his hollow eyes staring at her reflection, that same grotesque grin etched on his decayed face. The last thing Sarah heard was the crackling radio whispering, "You should have turned back." Josh was driving through the desert on a long, lonely highway, heading back home after visiting a friend. The trip should have been relaxing, but as the sun dipped below the horizon, the atmosphere turned sinister. There was no sign of civilization for miles, just endless stretches of road, the occasional cactus, and darkness that seemed to close in on him. It was nearing midnight when Josh noticed a figure standing on the side of the road up ahead. A man, thumb out, hoping to hitch a ride. Normally Josh wouldn't have even considered stopping, but something about this guy seemed desperate. Against his better judgment, he pulled over. The hitchhiker was a tall man in his mid-30s, wearing a dusty old jacket and a faded baseball cap. He approached the car with a strained smile. "Thanks, man. I was starting to think I'd be out here all night," he said as he climbed into the passenger seat. Josh gave a tight smile, glancing at the man. "Where are you headed?" "Just down the road," the man replied vaguely, his voice low and tired. They drove in silence for a while, the only sound the hum of the engine and the wind whistling outside. But after a few minutes, Josh noticed the man fidgeting, his eyes darting nervously to the rearview mirror. "You okay?" Josh asked, trying to hide his discomfort. The hitchhiker hesitated, then leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "You need to get off this road." Josh's grip tightened on the wheel. "What do you mean?" The man glanced out the window, his face pale. "This road isn't safe. I've seen things out here, things that shouldn't exist." Josh felt a chill run down his spine, but he forced a chuckle. "Come on, man, don't try to freak me out." The hitchhiker's face grew more serious. "I'm not joking. There's something that hunts along this road. I've been walking for hours trying to avoid it. It comes out at night looking for drivers who are alone." Josh's heart began to race, but he didn't want to show it. "What, like a ghost or something?" The man shook his head slowly. "Not exactly. It's worse than a ghost. Once you see it, it's already too late. No one who sees it survives." Josh was about to laugh off the man's warning when the headlights of his car flickered. The engine sputtered. His heart dropped. "What the hell?" he muttered, gripping the wheel tightly as the car coasted to a stop. The hitchhiker's breath quickened. "It's coming." Josh's pulse pounded in his ears. "What's coming?" Before the hitchhiker could answer, a sound like scraping metal echoed in the distance. The hitchhiker's face drained of all color. "Do not look in the mirrors." Josh's skin prickled with fear. "What are you talking about?" The hitchhiker's voice was a frantic whisper now. "It can only get you if you see it. Do not look in the rearview mirror. Do not look behind you." Josh's instinct told him to do the exact opposite. His eyes darted to the rearview mirror, and what he saw made his blood run cold. There, standing just behind the car, was a figure cloaked in shadow. Its limbs were unnaturally long, its face obscured by darkness, but its eyes, two glowing orbs, pierced through the night, locking onto Josh's reflection. The figure raised a hand, its long fingers scraping along the car's trunk with a horrible screech. Josh's body froze. The hitchhiker was trembling beside him. "You looked, didn't you?" the man whispered. The car windows began to fog up as the temperature inside plummeted. Josh's breaths came in ragged gasps, his heart hammering in his chest. The figure behind the car started to move closer, each step slow and deliberate. The hitchhiker grabbed Josh's arm. "Drive, now, don't look again." With shaking hands, Josh fumbled to start the car. The engine roared to life, but before he could hit the gas, the figure appeared directly outside the passenger side window, its face inches from the glass. Josh could barely make out its features, distorted, hollow, inhuman. The hitchhiker screamed, "Go, go!" Josh slammed on the gas, the tires screeching as the car lurched forward. The figure disappeared into the darkness behind them, but Josh knew it wasn't gone. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the wheel, his heart racing, eyes locked straight ahead. They drove in silence for miles, neither of them daring to speak or look back. When they finally reached a gas station at the edge of the desert, Josh pulled over, shaking. He turned to the hitchhiker to ask what that thing was, but the seat beside him was empty. The door was shut, the seatbelt still buckled, but the man was gone, vanished as if he had never been there. Josh stared at the empty seat, his mind racing. The gas station attendant knocked on the window, making Josh jump. He rolled it down. "You okay, buddy?" The attendant asked, eyeing him warily. Josh shook his head, his voice trembling. "There was a man. A hitchhiker. He was just here." The attendant's face grew grim. "You must have picked him up on that road. There's been no living hitchhiker on that stretch for years." "Not since the disappearances started." Josh's stomach churned. He'd heard stories about the road before, but he never believed them. Until now. As he sped away from the gas station, Josh glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. And there, in the distance, he saw them, those same glowing eyes watching him drive.